Throughout the Tudor period, and in the centuries after, the site of Tower Hill in London became known as the public beheading spot, and it was here where many significant Tudor people met their executioners. Sir Thomas More, during the reign of Henry VIII, was condemned there, as was Bishop John Fisher, a man whose execution caused a huge amount of distress and upset. It was during Henry VIII's reign that around 70,000 people were executed inside of his kingdom, but even his closest friends were not exempt from his tyrannical behaviour and actions. And this included his greatest friends. Thomas Cromwell is remembered today as the chief minister of the king, who made him incredibly wealthy as he dissolved monasteries and religious houses all across the nation, and the dissolution led to monks being executed, very pious and religious people who were slaughtered in the most awful ways. Many more lost their homes and ways of life, but some abbots were even hanged, drawn and quartered, with their heads placed above their abbeys. But Thomas Cromwell would fall from grace as he made a huge mess of arranging Henry VIII's fourth marriage, and he was later sentenced to death. But alongside Cromwell that day, there was a man executed with him who was known for a number of other offences and crimes. But who was this mysterious man condemned on the 28th of July 1540 on Tower Hill with the King's chief minister? Walter Hungerford was born around 1503, and he was the only son of Sir Edward Hungerford. His father was a prominent figure inside the court of Henry VIII, and he was also invited to attend the huge gatherings and meetings between the English and the French king. He attended the Field of the Cloth of Gold, but within 2 years, Edward Hungerford died. Walter then came to the king's court himself, and he was appointed to the position of the squire of the body of the king. This allowed Walter Hungerford private moments and meetings with the king, and it was a very exclusive position, and many people were jealous of this job. Specifically, it involved preparing the king's clothes and helping him dress in the morning and also wash, and it was a very highly thought of position. Hungerford was considered a personal attendant of the ruthless and brutal Tudor king. His relationship with Henry VIII continued to grow, and because of this, Hungerford was given a number of significant rewards, and he was given a sizable allowance and was also granted land. But he was also well respected, and he married 3 times. But his third wife, a lady named Elizabeth Hussey, was the first Baron Hussey of Sleaford's daughter, and she wanted to meet the king's chief adviser, Thomas Cromwell. Hungerford at the time wanted to become the Sheriff of Wiltshire, and he later was given this position. But Cromwell and Hungerford got along very well, and he was considered to have been a close ally of Cromwell. Of course, this was something which was considered a good thing when Cromwell was in power, but when he fell from favour, it was very dangerous. To be linked to someone like Cromwell had many benefits, as he was making the king a huge sum of money with the dissolutions, but when he fell from grace, Hungerford came crashing with him. But the king clearly liked Hungerford, but his alliance with Cromwell led to his execution and his slaughter on Tower Hill. As the king's third wife, Jane Seymour, had died following giving birth to Edward VI, the king's male heir and successor, the hunt was on for a fourth wife for the English king. It was Thomas Cromwell himself who suggested a marriage between the English king and the daughters of the Duke of Cleves, and with this a painter, Hans Holbein, was dispatched to Germany to paint the 2 princesses, Amalia and Anne. When Henry VIII was presented with these paintings, he chose to enter marriage negotiations with Anne of Cleves, but when the pair first met, it was a terrible failure. Anne of Cleves failed to recognise the king, and of course she was not enamoured with the fact she was marrying an overweight, middle-aged man. And Henry VIII did not like the prospect of his marriage with Anne, and referred to her as the Mare of Flanders, and he believed that she was ugly. But Henry VIII could not find a way out of the marriage, and he had to go ahead with it. and with this Cromwell was seen in the eyes of his former friend as a failure, and the king then had Cromwell arrested for treason and heresy. The truth with this was that the many of Cromwell's enemies had dug their claws into him and had arranged for his downfall, and they wanted more power and favour in the king's eyes. But the king's annulment cost him heavily, and it certainly cost Cromwell very much, as he was later sentenced to death in the June of 1540 for plotting to kill the king, and also heresy. But Walter Hungerford was known inside the court for sometimes being cruel and terrible, especially towards his wife. It was no secret that he kept her locked inside of a tower in his house at Farley, Hungerford, and it was alleged that he tried to starve her and then poison her. But Cromwell was then sent a letter from Elizabeth, and in this she outlined that, continually locked in one of my lord's towers of his castle in Hungerford, as I have been there 3 or 4 years past without comfort of any creature, and under the custody of my lord's chaplain, which has once or twice here therefore poisoned me. I have none other meat nor drink, but such as cometh from the said priest. I have drank my own water, or else I should die for lack of sustenance. Elizabeth had asked Cromwell for divorce proceedings, and she said that I may sooner object such matters against him with many other detestable and urgent causes that he can against me, if I would express them, as he well knoweth. But because of his friendship with Hungerford, Cromwell ignored this letter. But when his downfall came, Walter Hungerford's would also come. The royal court began to learn about the treatment of his wife, and the Privy Council were then ordered to investigate the abuse. This led to Walter Hungerford being arrested and then charged with 3 different crimes. The first of these was that he had employed a priest inside of his house who said that Henry VIII was a heretic, and that he had preached slanderous sermons against Henry VIII. The second charge was that he had employed another priest who was said to have been a witch or an evil doctor who predicted the death of the king, and this was then said to have been a treasonous offence. The final charge was that he had been involved in committing what was referred to as, at the time, unnatural acts, and this charge was outlined by the Buggery Act. Specifically, the crimes that Hungerford was accused of was replete with innumerable, detestable and abominable vices, and wretchedness of living, and hath accustomedly exercised, frequented, and used the abominable and detestable vice and sin of buggery, with William Master, Thomas Smith, and other of his servants. In this he was accused of having a sexual relationship with 2 men and his servants, and this was of course a very serious crime during the Tudor period. But these crimes and charges, especially because of his close relationship with Thomas Cromwell, were dealt with very seriously, and Cromwell was sentenced to death, as was Sir Walter Hungerford. To await their deaths and dates with the executioner, the pair were held inside the Tower of London. There would have been some debate as to executing them inside of the Tower, due to their high-profile statuses as members of the king's household and court, but this was not allowed, and because of their birth statuses, the pair were to be executed on Tower Hill. This was a public execution, and on the 28th of July 1540, Cromwell and Hungerford were taken to Tower Hill on the short walk north of the Tower, and the pair were to be executed together on Tower Hill. Many people gathered to see Cromwell lose his head, a man who was hated by many across the nation, and Cromwell was executed first by a botched executioner, and it took a number of swings of the axe to take the former chief adviser of Henry VIII's head from his body. But on the scaffold it was said of Hungerford, who watched his former friend's execution, that he seemed so unquiet that many judged him rather in a frenzy than otherwise, and he went to his own execution screaming in panic, especially after he'd seen the bloodbath inflicted upon his former friend Cromwell. It isn't known if the executioner performed the execution of Walter Hungerford well or not. The executioner certainly botched Cromwell's execution, taking many swings, and he was clearly not the most skilled with the axe, and this could have led to Hungerford's also being performed poorly. It's probable that his head was also displayed upon London Bridge after his death too. But Walter Hungerford was a significant villain of the reign of Henry VIII, who treated his wife terribly and poorly, locking her up and starving her. But he was accused of many different crimes, and on Tower Hill he was condemned after witnessing his former friend have his head hacked off. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.